All right. Welcome back to week 15 of our podcast. Last week we started in on the Renaissance and talked about their new attitudes towards music and towards playing around with Gregorian chant, those plain chant styles. We also talked about the expansion of its function in church and being able to use polyphony, not just monophony, in the Mass, and how it became standard that there were 5 movements within the Mass that they were allowed to do that to. Today we're going to go into the high Renaissance style and see where we come out on the other side. Maybe talking about music as expression as well. We're going to hear from a composer named Josquin de Pré, who lived from 1450 to 1521, and hear some of his music as well. So let's jump in. The High Renaissance. Around 1500, a new style emerged for masses, motets, and chansons that would hold sway for much of the 16th century. The chief characteristics of this High Renaissance musical style was a careful blend of 2 vocal techniques, imitative counterpoint and homophony, which we talked about several weeks ago. Most polyphony at the beginning of the 15th century was non-imitative. Most polyphony at the end of the century was imitative. This remarkable change is due partly to the fact that imitative polyphony, or imitation, reflects the ideals of moderation and balance that also characterize the visual arts of the High Renaissance. In the Ralph Madonna, the calm, dignified repose expressed by the figures and faces is as striking as the beautiful balance among all the pictorial elements. By its very nature, imitative texture depends on a carefully controlled balance among multiple voice parts. A first voice begins with a motive, designed to fit the words being set. Soon other voices enter, one by one, singing the same motive and words, but at different pitch levels. Meanwhile, the earlier voices continue with new melodies that complement the later voices without swamping them. Each voice has a genuinely melodic quality, and all the melodies are drawn from a single source. None is merely accompaniment or filler, and none predominates for very long. We can get an impression of the equilibrium of imitative polyphony from its look right here, even without reading the music exactly. This excerpt is from Josquin Paré, Pange Lingua Mass, which we will hear a bit of very soon. Homophony. Almost all polyphony involves some chords as a product of its simultaneously sounding melodies. But in the music of Machaut, for example, the chords are more of a byproduct. Late medieval composers concentrated on the horizontal aspect of texture at the expense of vertical ones, delighting in the separateness of their different voice parts. Chordal sonority was a secondary consideration. That's the sound of the chords. A major achievement of the High Renaissance style was to create a rich chordal quality out of polyphonic lines that still maintain a quiet sense of independence. Composers also used pure homophony, passages of block chord writing. They learned to use homophony both as a contrast to imitative texture and as an expressive resource in its own right. Old characteristics. The ideal tone color at the time, especially for sacred music, becomes acapella performance. That is, performance by voices alone. Tempo and dynamics change little in the course of a piece. The rhythm is fluid, without any sharp accents, and shifting unobtrusively all the time, so that the meter is often obscured. The melodies never go very high or very low in any one voice. The ups and downs are carefully balanced. This music rarely settles into the easy swing of a dance rhythm or into the clear pattern of an actual tune. Music in the High Renaissance style can sometimes strike modern listeners as vague, but if we listen more closely and always listen to the words as well as the music, its flexible, sensitivity, and rich expressive potential may come clear. Does it remind us of a wonderfully musical and subtle speaking voice? The 16th century would have been pleased to think so. So we're going to look at Josquin des Prés, a composer who lived from 1450 to 1529. The first master of the High Renaissance style was Josquin des Prés. We often just refer to him as Josquin. Like Dufay, he was born in the north of France, and like Dufay and many others of his countrymen, in early life he traveled to Italy. The list of Josquin's patrons reads like a Renaissance who's who. Pope Alexander VI, the notorious Sforza family of Milan, the Estes of Ferrara, and Louis VII of France. An amazingly imaginative composer, Josquin brought the 15th century Mass to a brilliant climax and pioneered whole new expressive genres, such as the 16th century chanson and motet. He was famous both for his technical prowess and for his expressive innovations, for the childlike serenity of his motet Ave Maria, as well as the grief-stricken accents of Plancit autem David, a setting of King David's lament for his dead son Absalom. So the song we're going to look at is Pange Lingua Mass. It was written around the year 1510. So Josquin wrote 18 different settings of the Mass, all large pieces in the standard 5-section form. The Pange Lingua Mass, one of his masterpieces, derives its melodic material largely from a hymn called Pange Lingua. This is a Gregorian hymn of the same kind as Ave Maris Stella, which we have heard in Dufay's harmonized setting. Pange Lingua, and hence Josquin's Mass, is designed for Corpus Christi, a feast celebrating the Holy Eucharist. This is a 4-part Mass, that is, a Mass for a choir with 4 separate voice parts. In Josquin's day, boys sang the high parts and men the lower ones. Josquin probably started his musical career as a choir boy. Today, women usually substitute for boys in music of this period. We shall examine the first 2 sections of Josquin's Pange Lingua Mass. The first being the Kyrie. The men in the choir sing line 1 of the hymn Pange Lingua before the first section of the Pange Lingua Mass. This first section, the Kyrie, is an elemental prayer consisting of 3 subsections. You have Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, Christe eleison, Christ have mercy, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. So that's the Kyrie, the Christe, and the Kyrie. For Kyrie 1, Josquin wrote a point of imitation, a brief passage of imitative polyphony covering 1 short phrase of a composition's verbal text and using a single musical motif. Josquin's point of imitation involves 7 entries of the following motive, a paraphrase of line 1 of the hymn. The order of the voice entries is tenor, bass, weight, soprano, alto, wait, bass, tenor, soprano. Josquin did not invent this motive. It was derived from the plain-chant hymn as shown above. But his paraphrase is very beautiful, especially in the end. The Christe has 2 points of imitation, also derived from the hymn, for the words Christe and eleison. The motives of these points are rhythmically similar. Kyrie too has a new point of imitation for the words Kyrie eleison, followed by free, that is, non-hymn material, a descending sequence, and prior to the drawn-out final cadence, a powerful oscillating passage. The next section we're going to take a look at is the Gloria. In the 4 remaining sections of the Mass, the Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei, countless new points of imitation are heard, but now they are interspread with occasional text phrases set in homophony. The second subsection of the Gloria, the Quitolis, begins with a passage in which polyphony and homophony are contrasted in a highly expressive way. At the beginning, we can almost envisage 1 or 2 persons timidly invoking Him who takes away the sins of the world in polyphony. And then the whole congregation, or the whole of Christendom, urgently responding together with the plea for mercy and relief, have mercy, in homophony. This music gives a dramatic sense of communal worship. The Quitolis as a whole includes 8 points of imitation and 4 homophonic or nearly homophonic phrases. The point for Tu solus Dominus is illustrated as well. In imitated phrases, the vocal lines fit together smoothly into chords, and while the sequence of the chords seems hard to predict, at least for modern ears, it does not seem arbitrary. The remarkable mood of Josquin's music, at once sober, inquiringly energetic, and reverential, owes much to its Phrygian, or scale starting on E, mode. Like the hymn Pange Lingua, the Pange Lingua Mass is in this mode. So here is the Gloria from the Pange Lingua Mass. Once again, I will put up the translation on the screen. Now, after hearing these two examples from Josquin's Mass, we're going to end it for today. Next time, we're going to jump into music as expression and the late Renaissance, more specifically with the composer Palestrina and his work with the Mass. After that, we'll be looking at instrumental music, the early developments in instrumental music, because as we've mentioned recently, they didn't have much of a need for instrumental music at the time. Acapella was the preferred way of music, and of course, what goes along with instrumental music but dances. So we'll take a look at a couple of dances. And then finally in this section, looking at early European colonialism and its music. Music, played an important role in colonialism, and not always in a negative way. For example, before I was a teacher, I went up and spent some time in Nouai-Anche, also known as Glitlikamix. It's about a 90-minute drive north of Terrace, which is like 16 hours north of Vancouver. And when the Salvation Army in Canada made its way from the east to the west, they brought their brass bands with them. And the communities up there in the Nisga'a territory are still really big into brass bands because of the connection that the colonialists, and specifically the Salvation Army, made with those people. Of course, there were a lot of things not so positive that came out of colonization, but this love of music that was not their own was something that came out of it, which could be seen as positive. So with that, we'll leave that there for today, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.